University of New York and a 2008 Nobel Memorial Prize laureate in Economic Sciences to give the keynote address of the Skopje Economic and Finance Forum.
And I want to touch on 4 topics in this limited time available to me. The first being inflation, the big issue certainly for my country, for much of Europe at the moment. The second is prospective, but certainly of great concern, possibilities of recession, closely tied to the inflation issue. Then a little bit about medium-term economic prospects, what happens beyond the current crisis, and finally about the changing shape of globalization. Massive labor underutilization in Europe, but we sustained incomes with fiscal measures, which was a good thing. This is the inflation. Some inflation was probably, even without the exceptional events, some inflation was probably inevitable as a result of these policies. It doesn't mean some things that we should have seen coming but didn't, and then some things that nobody saw coming. So inflation, headline inflation, is very much higher than it was 2.5 years ago, because it's often said that Europe is not the same, but it's actually, if you look more closely, there's closer correspondence. This is a stronger case for the United States than it is for the Euro area, but in fact it's true in Europe as well. Unemployment, inflation, taking out food, energy, in April was 1% monthly in the Euro area. That's a pretty high rate of inflation. That's actually somewhat higher than the United States, although you can see that the breadth of inflation. It's necessary to cool the economies down a little bit. It is necessary to have growth especially in the United States, but also in the Euro area. We need to have some period when the economies grow more slowly than their productive capacity, so as to remove. In Europe, a recession is usually defined as 2 quarters of economic shrinkage. In the United States, a recession is defined as it's a recession if the recession dating committee says it's a recession. So it's not well defined. But will it be a technical recession? Maybe, maybe not. Will it feel like we're suffering a little bit of economic pain? Yes, it will. Pricing and wages have that expectation of inflation built in, and you really need to go through a severe economic contraction to end the inflation. There's no hint of that. We have multiple pieces of evidence. We have surveys of consumer expectations. We have surveys of business expectations. We have financial markets. Inflation to persist long enough to become embedded, but so far it hasn't been, and we're now moving. So far, the actual concrete policy measures have been limited. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates a little bit. The ECB is talking about raising rates. But the thing about monetary policy is that it, unlike most other forms of policy, the effects, instead of lagging the policy change, they lead it. So the interest rates that actually matter for the economy are longer-term interest rates, which have already risen substantially on both sides of the Atlantic. But the reality is that it looks like a mild economic slowdown is probably all that we need. Secular stagnation. But what it really means, it's neither secular nor stagnation. What it really means is that we're in a world where the amount that businesses were willing to invest was greater than the amount that the public wanted to save. In general, the need for investment is low, and meanwhile, it's substantial saving, and we're probably going to be back in that world. A world where what may change, given recent events, is globalization. that there was already some reason to think that we were in a new era for globalization, even before the pandemic. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but conventional measures of globalization actually peaked about 2008. The share of trade in world GDP has been slightly declining for almost 15 years. I've seen that autocratic regimes are erratic and unreliable. The supply chains that depend upon those regimes are riskier than people thought. We expect that labor-intensive goods, you will still want to do that in places that have lower wages. But wages here are not as low as they are in Bangladesh, but they're a lot lower than they are in Germany. And so 80% of the savings in labor cost from outsourcing can be achieved by producing in Southeastern Europe rather than in these more remote locations.